Now you're going to listen to my story. Be strong, pay attention, and remember, every word here reflects a truth, and subscribe to the channel.
The cold bit at the exposed skin of my wrists, a sharp, unwelcome reminder of the season that was, by all accounts, supposed to be filled with warmth and cheer. I pulled the worn cuffs of my hand-me-down jacket further over my knuckles, the rough wool scratching faintly against my skin. The air itself tasted like metallic frost, and the exhaust fumes from Mrs. Henderson's ancient Ford Focus, which idled noisily at the curb, waiting for her daughter, Bethany. Bethany, bless her perpetually chipper heart, was already bouncing down the school steps, her bright red scarf a defiant splash of color against the gray afternoon. Sarah, voice, a little too loud in the sudden lull between the bell's shriek and the rush of departing students, made me flinch. She was standing a little too close, her breath a visible cloud in the frigid air, smelling faintly of the peppermint gum she was always chewing. Her eyes, usually sparkling with an almost relentless optimism, were narrowed slightly, a question mark etched between her perfectly sculpted brows. I blinked, pulling my gaze from the exhaust pipe of the Focus, which was now puffing out thicker plumes of white vapor. "Yeah, fine," I mumbled, the words feeling dry and brittle on my tongue. My backpack, heavy with textbooks and the unspoken weight of algebra homework I still hadn't started, shifted on my shoulders, the strap digging into the same old spot, a familiar, dull ache. Sarah didn't move. She just stood there, her head tilted, her gaze unwavering. The silence that stretched between us was not the comfortable, companionable kind we usually shared. This was a silence thick with unspoken observations, a silence that felt like a challenge. I could feel the microscopic dust motes garishing in the weak, watery light filtering through the grimy panes of the school's front doors, each speck a tiny, shimmering world, oblivious to the gloom pressing in on me. The faint, tinny strains of a distorted Christmas carol, something about sleigh bells, seeped from a nearby store, a cruel mockery of the festive spirit everyone else seemed to be embracing. It sounded distant, almost mocking. "You look like you just lost a fight with a particularly grumpy polar bear," she finally said, her voice softening, a hint of concern replacing the earlier inquiry. Her hand, gloved in a bright pink knitted mitten, reached out instinctively, then hesitated, hovering in the space between us before she seemed to think better of it and dropped it back to her side, clutching the strap of her own much lighter backpack. I managed a weak, non-committal shrug. My throat felt tight, as if a small cold stone had lodged itself there. The scent of pine, artificial and cloying, wafted past as a group of students carrying a box of tinsel hurried by, their laughter echoing briefly before fading into the general din of the street. It was everywhere now, that fake pine smell, like the world was trying to force-feed us holiday cheer whether we wanted it or not. For me, it just made my stomach clench. "Sarah asked?" Her voice brimming with the kind of genuine enthusiasm that I found increasingly difficult to tolerate. She was practically vibrating with it, her eyes scanning the street as if expecting Santa's sleigh to appear at any moment. "Oh my God, only 3 weeks until Christmas. My mom already started baking her gingerbread cookies and the kitchen smells divine. Are you guys putting up the giant inflatable Santa this year? I love seeing it from my window. You know, the one with the little reindeer pulling him?" I forced myself to meet her gaze, but my eyes skittered away almost immediately, landing on a discarded coffee cup half buried in a snowdrift by the curb, its lid askew, a dark stain blooming on the pristine white. I don't know, Sarah," I mumbled, shuffling my feet on the cracked pavement. The worn soles of my sneakers offered little insulation against the cold seeping up from the ground. A gust of wind, sharp and biting, whipped around the corner of the building, rustling the dead leaves still clinging stubbornly to the branches of the oak tree by the bus stop. It made a dry, brittle sound, like old paper tearing. Sarah's brow furrowed again, deeper this time. "What do you mean you don't know? Your mom always goes all out. I mean, last year, the lights on your house practically rivaled the North Pole, and your dad usually helps with the lights on the roof, doesn't he?" She even mimicked my mom's high-pitched, slightly exasperated yell, a sound that under different circumstances would have made me laugh, but today it just twisted another knot in my stomach. The memory of my dad, perched precariously on the edge of the roof, a tangle of multicolored wires draped over his shoulder, his face red from the effort and the cold, flashed through my mind. And my mom, standing below, hands on her hips, a worried frown etched between her eyes even as she tried to sound annoyed. It felt like a lifetime ago, a scene from a different family, a different me. The contrast with the current reality was a physical ache, a dull throb behind my eyes. "Things are different this year," I said, the words barely a whisper, carried away by the wind before they even fully left my lips. I hugged my backpack tighter, as if the weight could anchor me, keep me from floating away on a sea of uncomfortable questions and painful memories. The smell of damp earth, rich and decaying, mixed with the faint sweet scent of something burning, perhaps leaves or just a neighbor's fireplace, filled my nostrils. It was a smell of endings, not beginnings. Sarah's expression shifted, her usual cheer giving way to genuine concern. Her voice dropped, becoming softer, more hesitant. Different how? Is your Aunt Carol coming to stay?
She paused, then added, "Or is it your cousin Mark? Did he get into trouble again?" I shook my head slowly, feeling the strands of hair stick to my forehead, cold and damp. The chill was seeping into my bones now, a pervasive cold that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. "No," I said, my voice gaining a little strength, a little edge of resignation. "It's not Aunt Carol." I looked up, finally meeting her gaze, and tried to articulate the heavy, crushing truth that had been hanging over my house, over my family, for weeks now. It felt like trying to explain the color of despair or the weight of an invisible burden. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air scraping against my lungs. The words felt like lead on my tongue, heavy and difficult to dislodge. I saw the question in her eyes, the genuine desire to understand, and I knew I had to say it. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. It was expectant, waiting for me to fill it. The muted rumble of traffic was the only sound, a dull, distant roar that seemed to emphasize the quiet between us. "My mom said we're not celebrating Christmas happily this year," I replied, the words tumbling out, raw and unvarnished, leaving a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. "My mom said we're not celebrating Christmas happily this year," I replied, the words tumbling out, raw and unvarnished, leaving a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. It felt like I had just swallowed a mouthful of the cold, damp air that clung to my skin, a taste of metallic dread and stale regret. Clara, who had been leaning forward slightly, her brow furrowed in concern, recoiled imperceptibly. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of quick understanding, widened, then clouded over with a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. A sharp, almost inaudible gasp escaped her lips, a tiny puff of white vapor in the crisp autumn air. Her right hand, which had been resting casually on her knee, lifted slowly, fingers splaying, as if she were about to ward off an invisible blow. The small silver ring on her index finger glinted dully in the weak afternoon light. The muted rumble of traffic, previously a distant, almost comforting hum, now seemed to press in on us, a heavy, indifferent backdrop to my shattering revelation. The silence between us stretched, not the expectant silence from before, but a thick, suffocating blanket of quiet. I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of a bus changing gears a few blocks away, the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the cracked pavement at our feet, and the distant, rhythmic squeak of a swing set in the park across the street. But mostly, I heard the rapid, uneven thump of my own heart against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat trying to push back the cold that was now not just clinging to my forehead, but seeping into the very core of my being.
I felt a tremor run through me, a shiver that had nothing to do with the external temperature, but everything to do with the vulnerability of having spoken those words aloud. My gaze dropped from Clara's stunned face to my interlocked hands, picking at a loose thread on the worn denim of my jeans. The fabric felt rough and cold beneath my fingertips. "What do you mean, not happily?" her voice whispered, her voice barely a breath, stripped of its usual cheerful lilt. "What do you mean, not happily?" Her voice hitched on the last word, an unspoken fear hanging in the air. The smell of decaying leaves and damp earth, usually a comforting scent of autumn, now felt heavy and melancholy, mirroring the mood that had settled upon us. I shook my head again, a slow, deliberate movement, trying to dislodge the lingering tendrils of cold from my hair, but it felt stubbornly stuck. "No," I managed, my voice still rough. "Not sick." The words felt like sandpaper against my throat. I swallowed, trying to clear the sensation, but it persisted. Then, her voice gained a fraction of its usual strength, laced now with an urgent, almost desperate need for clarity. She leaned forward again, her expression a mix of bewilderment and deep concern. "Did your mom and dad—" She left the sentence unfinished, the unspoken possibility of marital strife hanging heavy in the air between us, a new, equally unpleasant flavor to the bitter aftertaste. I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief moment, picturing the quiet, strained dinners, the hushed conversations behind closed doors, the absence of laughter that had slowly, insidiously crept into our home over the past few weeks. It wasn't about a fight or a separation, not in the way she was thinking. It was something far more insidious, a slow erosion of joy. When I opened my eyes, the world seemed slightly dimmer, the colors muted. "No, they're not separating," I said, my voice barely above a murmur. It's just everything. The house, the bills." The words came out in fragments, each one a tiny shard of the larger, jagged truth. I looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw the genuine pain beginning to register in her eyes, a reflection of my own. Her hand, which had been hovering, now settled gently on my arm, her fingers warm despite the chill in the air. The warmth was a stark contrast to the cold that seemed to be radiating from within me. "So," she prompted softly, her thumb stroking my sleeve in a comforting rhythm. "Did he?" The question hung there, heavy and almost unbearable. I nodded. A single jerky motion. The knot in my stomach tightened, a cold, hard stone pressing against my diaphragm. 2 months ago, I confessed, the words a raw whisper, barely audible above the distant traffic. He was let go. Restructuring, they called it. The injustice of it, the sudden, brutal severance of a lifetime of dedication, still burned.
The memory of my father's face that night, pale and drawn, etched with a kind of bewildered defeat, flashed before my eyes. The way he had held my mom, both of them silent, their shoulders shaking with unspoken grief. The smell of his aftershave, usually a comforting scent, had been mixed with the faint, acrid smell of desperation that night. "Clara," repeated, her voice hushed, her grip on my arm tightened slightly. Shame, hot and prickly, bloomed on my cheeks, a stark contrast to the internal cold. "I couldn't," I admitted, looking away again, my gaze drifting to a lone pigeon pecking at crumbs near a discarded coffee cup on the grass. The pigeon seemed utterly oblivious to the weight of our conversation, its single-minded focus on sustenance, a stark reminder of our own looming anxieties. "Mom, she made me promise not to. She said we needed to figure things out first. She didn't want anyone to pity us or ask too many questions." A humorless laugh escaped my lips, a short, sharp burst of air that did little to alleviate the pressure in my chest. "But he hasn't. And Christmas, it's just another reminder of everything we can't do now." The full implications of my mother's statement began to unfurl, like a dark banner unfurling in the wind. No tree, not the big, fragrant pine we usually got, filling the living room with the scent of resin and fresh needles. No twinkling lights, no carefully chosen ornaments, each one holding a memory. No gifts, no morning tearing of wrapping paper, no squeals of delight. No big family dinner, no overflowing table laden with roasted turkey and sweet potato casserole, no boisterous laughter echoing through the house. The house itself, usually a sanctuary of warmth and festivity during the holidays, would be a hollow shell. So not happily means... Clara's voice was barely audible, laced with a new kind of sadness. She sounded genuinely heartbroken for me. The warmth of her hand on my arm felt like a lifeline, but also a painful reminder of the chasm that had opened between my world and hers, a world where Christmas was still a given, a joyous expectation. I nodded, the movement slow and heavy. She said we can't afford it, not even a small tree. I trailed off, the words catching in my throat. The thought of a Christmas without its familiar rituals, without the comfort of tradition, felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the spirit, the hope, the very essence of what Christmas meant to us as a family. It was about the loss of magic, replaced by a stark, biting reality. And she said it wouldn't feel right to pretend, I continued, finding a sliver of strength, a desperate need to make her understand the depth of our despair. To put up decorations and act like everything's fine when it's not, when we're worried about keeping the lights on, literally.
O vento picou saitamente.
ruslando as folhas secas com uma mais insistente som, e eu puxei meu cardigan suade taita ao redor, mas ele deu pouco para combater o interno chill. Eu podia quase sentir o fento metálico cento de pênis frios, o cento de escassez. Era um imaginado cento, um fantasma, mas se sentia real o suficiente para aplicar meu nariz. Clara retirou sua mão de meu braço, mas só para se aproximar, o seu ombro bruxando o meu. Eu podia sentir o pequeno tremor nela também agora. Ela estava processando-o, lendo o peso das minhas palavras. Seu gaze estava fixo em algum ponto distante, seus lábios prensados em uma linha fina e grima. A vivacidade usual tinha drenado de seu face, substituída por uma quaita contemplativa sorosa. Ela não ofereceu platitudes, não tentou imediatamente tirar-me do poço, e por isso eu estava profundamente grata. Ela sentou-se sozinha, alauando o silêncio a retornar, mas dessa vez era um tipo diferente de silêncio. Era um silêncio compartilhado, carregado de empatia sem dita, um silêncio a conhecimento do peso que eu acabara de despir. O horror do tráfico distante parecia assuaftiçar-se, a receder, assim como respeitando a gravidade do momento. Sentamo-nos ali, lado a lado, dois figuras contra a luz desvanecente da tarde do outono, unidas pelo chill que agora realmente parecia se ceber em tudo. Clara finalmente quebrou o silêncio, sua voz um sussurro rouco que parecia carregar o peso da nossa conversa. Eu tenho pensado, ela começou, e eu me virei para ela, meus olhos encontrando os seus. Minha tia trabalha naquele centro comunitário novo, sabe? Eles têm um programa de assistência para contas de serviços públicos, algo para ajudar as famílias. E ela mencionou que estão procurando voluntários para ajudar com as decorações de Natal este ano. Com um pequeno estipêndio, claro. Não é muito, mas talvez ajude com o aquecimento. As palavras caíram sobre mim como uma lufada de ar fresco depois de um longo período de sufocamento. Não era uma solução mágica, não resolveria todos os meus problemas, mas era uma porta, uma fresta de luz em meio à escuridão que parecia me engolir. O cheiro fantasma de moedas frias começou a diminuir, substituído por um calor súbito e inesperado no meu peito. A simples ideia de ter um caminho, um pequeno passo a tomar, já era um alívio imenso. Eu não sabia o que dizer, então apenas acenei com a cabeça, meus olhos marejados de uma gratidão que as palavras não conseguiriam expressar. Clara me deu um pequeno sorriso, um sorriso tênue, mas que continha a promessa de apoio inabalável. Ela se levantou, me oferecendo a mão, e eu a peguei, sentindo a força reconfortante do seu aperto. O vento ainda soprava, mas parecia menos cortante agora. O outono ainda era frio, mas a perspectiva de uma pequena ajuda, de um propósito, começou a aquecer algo dentro de mim. Caminhamos em silêncio por mais um tempo, mas o silêncio não era mais opressor. Era um silêncio compartilhado de planos nascentes, de esperança sussurrada. Quando chegamos à rua dela, as luzes da casa de Clara já estavam acesas, projetando um brilho âmbar acolhedor na calçada. Uma fragrância suave de comida caseira escapava pela porta, e eu percebia o quão faminta eu estava, não apenas por comida, mas por calor, por segurança. Vamos entrar, Clara disse, sua voz um pouco mais firme agora, e eu a segui sem hesitação. Dentro da cozinha quente, o vapor dançava sobre uma chaleira no fogão, e o aroma de chá de camomila enchia o ar. Clara me entregou uma caneca fumegante, e o calor se espalhou pelos meus dedos. Nós nos sentamos à mesa de madeira, a luz suave da cozinha nos envolvendo. Ela começou a me explicar os detalhes do programa comunitário, os horários para as decorações, os formulários a preencher. Eu ouvia, acenando com a cabeça. Cada palavra uma pedra que eu podia usar para reconstruir a ponte sobre o abismo da minha preocupação. Não era o fim da luta, não. Mas sentada ali, na luz morna, com o calor do chá nas minhas mãos e a voz de Clara me oferecendo um caminho, pela primeira vez em muito tempo,
Eu senti que conseguiríamos manter as luzes acesas, literalmente, e que o inverno, por mais frio que fosse, seria enfrentado, não sozinha, mas com a calorosa promessa de um futuro, por mais tênue que fosse, iluminado pela amizade e pela esperança.